If you love extreme makeovers and watching dramatic furniture transformations, then this is the video for you. I'm Shireen with Olive Street Designs, and welcome back to my channel. This three-piece set, it's actually not even a set, but we'll go over that in a second. But these three pieces I'm putting together as a set. First of all, we have this long dresser, and it's in typical 50-year-old condition. It's worn, it's got a little bit of weathering, water stuff, and all kinds of things, but good bones. The nightstands were in very similar condition. They also had some weathering and water damage on the top. Nice labeling in the drawers there for us in case you were wondering which ones went where. And then there's three center drawers, but wow, a really sticky door. It barely opens and closes, so we've got to address that. These drawers, in good condition. I love it when people put wood grain liners in, but these are just paper, so I was excited about that because I'm not having to deal with adhesive, but lots of powder. They must smell amazing. And here it is. Why did I put these together for a set? They have similar lines, similar bases, similar drawer styles. The tops are all oak. So I felt that even though these are mismatched pieces, they can become a cohesive set. So the first thing I want to do is start getting all the hardware off. The hardware doesn't match either, so that's all going to get changed, but we're going to be stripping the tops, adding new trim, adding legs, staining tops, doing some veneer repair. And along the way, I'm going to just explain all the products that I'm using and all the processes that I'm doing. And you're going to learn a ton in this video. And then at the end, the big reveal of, wow, is it even the same furniture pieces? So stick around, this is going to be a fun one. Well, I used my handy little cordless screwdriver to get all of that hardware off. I did find a couple of drawers that need to have some repairs to them, but we'll get to that. And then I decided to take out my buckets and buckets of hardware. I constantly take hardware off or find cool hardware and I get it and I bring it home and then they go in these bins. And I have so much hardware that I thought, let me see if I have something I can use here and start using up some of this. And along the way, I'm reorganizing and getting rid of some of them that I think I will never use. But at the very end in that last bin, I found not only pulls that actually fit in the same holes, and I only had two, but they also had matching knobs. I mean, score. This never happens, and I had the exact amount that I needed. And I think they're pretty cool. So I'm super excited. I'm actually going to reuse hardware. It never happens. I buy so much brand new hardware that I really want to try to use vintage when I can. So I'll take those little wins when I can find them because they don't always go that way. All right, I'm going to jump into cleaning. These are filthy. I've had them for a while. My workshop, of course, is super dusty and things just get dirty. But what I'm really cleaning off using a good degreaser is the years and years of furniture polish and, things from being used. So furniture polish, just the stuff from our hands, the oils and things, they're not great for sanding. They're not great for adhesion of my new products. So I want to make sure I clean them really good. So I'm using a little scrubber and a good degreaser and just getting into every little nook and cranny so that I can make sure that at least whatever's on the dresser now is not going to impede the adhesion of my new products. So I want to start with a nice clean slate. This degreaser is a concentrate, and it can just be a cleaner or you can mix it to be a degreaser, and I use the stronger concentration. Okay, as I finish up with all of the wiping down of everything, I'm going to go through and get everything vacuumed. And then I'm marking my drawers. Now in nightstands, I usually do a 1A, 1B, and call each nightstand a different. So this is going to be nightstand A, and the other one will be B, so that I can keep track of which drawers go where, even though I'm labeling 1 and 2. Now the tracks in this particular one track is completely off. The other one was really loose, so I do have to do some repairs there. But just getting everything out, and as soon as I got the nightstands vacuumed, I couldn't wait to start messing around with them. Because this is a design that's going to just develop. I kind of have some ideas in my head, but I really don't know because part of it is going to be determined by the furniture. And part of it is, what is this base looking like? Can I get it off of here? Can I change the look of it? So it had a lot of screws in it, which I took out, and then start using just my 5-in-1 tool and a hammer to see what I can pry off of here. And I got the piece on the front off and some of the trim pieces. And part of this is just discovering what's integrated into the piece, what is structural, what can I rip off of here, how much can I really change it without damaging it. And, it's trial and error, trial and error. And sometimes I have to start taking it apart before I figure it out. But I figured out that the side section, those trim pieces were fitting down inside that little trough. So I was like, oh boy, how am I going to make this work so that it looks correct, doesn't look weird after I get some of this adjusted. Now, why am I messing with this? Because I'm trying to decide, am I building a new base? Am I adding legs? What am I doing? They're just short. So I decided I'm going to just cut the sides down to match the front. And then I'm still in that, am I building bases or am I adding legs? It really is. I know a lot of people think I have this whole plan when I start, and sometimes I do. The plan just develops as we go. So I have committed now to cutting the sides of this off, and I'm using a little 5-inch saw. This is the best tool. I love that little tool. It's so handy. Okay, I'm completely deconstructing. This front trim is held on by a couple little pieces, and I need to get them off of there because I can't put it back that way. And these little pry bars are handy for things like that. Okay, I got everything off, and now I'm starting to figure out how am I going to rebuild these because I can't leave it like it is. There's nothing there to support that trim. And again, just setting up layers of things to figure out how is this going to go back together. Now I want to show you what came off. This is the piece that was on the front. And this is MDF. So when we talk about MDF, what in the world is MDF? It is an engineered product. It's made from a whole bunch of things like sawdust and particles of wood, and then they're put together with epoxy at high temperatures and pressed. And so it is essentially, it's kind of like cardboard, but it is essentially pressed sawdust. So if you've ever seen bubbles on the top of your pieces from water damage and things, it's usually from something like MDF because if it gets wet, it swells like nobody's business. Anyway, that was on the front. That front trim piece was MDF, so I'm not going to reuse it. That'll just get trashed. I try to keep, when I'm replacing things, I try to replace them with wood. So you can see that even that side piece there was MDF. But that was pretty much the only MDF on the whole piece were those bottom trim pieces. So now they're gone. Okay, now I have to essentially rebuild the base underneath those trim pieces. So those trim pieces just sit on the sides there. They were screwed on. And I'm going to put them back on there temporarily just as placeholders so I can do some measurements. And then once I figured out where they go and how they go on, now I'm gluing them on. I know that they weren't glued on to start with, or I never would have been able to get them on, but I need them to be a little more structural at this point. So they are going to be on there with some glue. I've got the sides on, I'm going to put the front on, and the front needs a little something to hang on to. It needs something to help support it. So I've got a piece there, and those two are going to be teamwork. The front trim piece is going to hang on to that one. Clamps are so handy to have. If you don't have clamps, just grab a couple. These bar clamps are great. The little spring clamps are great. You just need a few of each kind. And so now you can see how I'm starting to rebuild the base. And I decide, it'd probably be really helpful if I go ahead and screw this down into the side columns there. And my drill bit is absolutely stuck. That is solid oak right there. And as I was drilling, it just said, nope, I'm not going to turn in either direction anymore, and I'm not coming out. And I tried to get my drill to just hang on to it. I tried to move it around. I could not get it to budge. I tried vice grips. I tried whacking it a little bit with a hammer. I mean, I could not get that out of there. So whacked it with a hammer enough times that it broke. And I was like, okay, problem solved. Okay, so I got that on there and decided to skip. We're going to skip the screws going down into that column. So plenty of glue, a bunch of nails to hold everything in place. And now I'm on my way to having this rebuilt. I dry fit it, make sure everything fits well, put some glue down, nail it. This isn't going anywhere. I'm feeling pretty good about how this was rebuilt. Everything's gonna be okay. All right, now I'm measuring for my legs. Where do I want the legs to go? And I'm using a Forstner bit, and this bit is going to help recess the T-nuts. It's what's gonna hold the legs, and if you don't do this, I mean, you don't have to do this, but if you don't do this, then there's a little bit of a gap between the very bottom of your nightstands and where the legs go in. So I like to recess them a little bit. And I'm going to add all of the nuts and everything after. For now, I just want that structure to be there. And there it is, my new base. I know it was a lot of effort for this one little thing that's 3/4 of an inch thick, but it was necessary. I like this option so much better than what was there, that skirt that was there. So that just needed to happen. And then of course, now just admiring the labeling. I think I'm going to label underneath though. I'm going to skip those. I'm going to work on taking those out later. Hopefully I can get all of that off of there. All the drawers came out. There's a lot of drawers. There's 9 drawers here. And then this big heavy door. This door is solid wood. It's about 1.5 inches thick and very heavy, but it's got some issues because it's rubbing super hard. But these hinges are doing some work. So I was very careful to remove a couple screws from the top, couple screws from the bottom, and then just one last screw hanging it on there. That's the easiest way I can take those off of there because it's so heavy. Now, this dresser, even without the drawers in, is solid as a rock. It weighs so much. I can't move it around with the drawers in, so took everything out and I laid it down. It's laying on top of my dollies so that I can roll it around. And now I have to go through the same process here. Now remember that these are not a set. Now if they were a set, I'd say the bottom of the dresser is going to be built just like the bottom of the nightstands. But these are not the same maker, they're not the same set, so another discovery mission. And I discovered that that trim piece was on there kind of weird. I wish that I could have reused that, but it's cut at an angle in the front, and so it would look weird if I just added legs to that because this is curved. And you're like, why did you add legs to that and then have that curved area in the front? It doesn't look right. So I'm just not going to be able to reuse that. I really was trying. I took those side trim pieces off and I was like, is there a way? Can I rip this down and then just use that? And you can see the wheels are turning, and they turned all the way to Lowe's. It just was not going to work. So I had to go buy some wood. And turning down my aisle, this is the aisle I always end up in because they have all the trim, all the things that I build bases with. So I'm really familiar with everything here. And I'm just trying to come up with new trim pieces that will go along the front and side that will look cohesive so that when I add legs, it's going to look like it was meant to be there. So I just got, this is actually just a 4-inch baseboard and then a little trim piece on the top I'm going to stack. So you do need a miter saw for this. So I'm mitering my corners. This isn't measure twice, cut once, because I only bought a couple sticks of this, so I didn't have a lot of room for air. I'm also mitering the tiny little trim piece that's going to go on top to cover the seam. Okay, so this is going to be multi-layers. I've got this going around and then the little trim piece on top that will cover the seam. I think it's all going to work. It'll look like it was meant to be there. Now I'm measuring the 4x4 supports. And why am I using these big chunky pieces of wood? Because this dresser is heavy. I want these legs to have support. So I've measured them out and I am carefully making sure that they're all going to be the same. Now you have to take into consideration your blade width. So if you see my little mark there, I want to make sure my blade's not cutting through the middle of it or on either side of it. So that when you come down into the wood, all of your cuts are going to be the same because I'm cutting just to the left of my mark. Now look, you can still barely see my mark because I was just to the left of it. And if I do that with each piece, that's going to make my pieces all the same. So I line them all up. I need to make sure that they're all even, and we'll double check. They're good. And since I'm raising this dresser up, it needs a center foot. And that's just going to be to support it. This dresser is so heavy that it'll droop and sag in the middle if I don't put some type of a support in the back. So I cut a piece that is not only the part that's recessed, but it's also going to be just shy of the floor because I have a little adjustable foot. And I decided to cut a couple of angles in it so it will look more intentional, like it's kind of a foot back there rather than just a 2x4. And I'll paint it and make it look pretty. I'm cutting a hole in this end of it because I have a little adjustable foot that's going to be going in there. And that's the receiver for it. And then the little foot will screw right into that. So not only will this be pretty, but it will be functional and it will have some structure to it. It's just really important that sometimes you really need that center foot. So there it is. And I'm going to place it here where it's going to be when I'm all done. I'm not going to install it yet, but I'm going to drill some holes so that once I'm all done and I'm going to be placing it there, my holes are already drilled. I know exactly where it's going to go. It'll make that process easier. I feel much better about them structurally when I add the center foot. Okay, it's time to start adding the supports for the legs. And I'm just getting it placed in there, trying to figure out, I don't know why when I turn them they fit better, but they do. And I just decided, I think this will be better if I flip it upside down to work on it. And sure enough, that was easier. So these are going to go into each corner, and I'm finding screws that are long enough that are really going to have some purchase or bite into that 4x4 because I don't want it going anywhere. And there was a little area that just needed kind of a shim underneath it so that it was level. So I cut that in. Everything's getting glued in and nailed in and screwed in. These are getting glued on both sides, and they will get screwed on both sides as well. I put a clamp there just to hold it in place. I needed it going both directions. All right, so I've got something good and stable to screw into, and these screws that I'm putting in right through the sides of the furniture are going to be covered by those trim pieces that are going on. And so I'm not really having to worry about them, but I did have to back out a screw and then use a countersink bit so that the head of the screw would fit down into the wood a little bit better. There's that. And now that's going to be kind of sunk down in there so that I just have to fill it in and you won't be able to see it. So here's that process again, the countersink bit. The top one is going to be covered by the trim, and so it didn't need to be kind of sunk down in there. But this one I have to actually put filler in. Okay, I don't think those supports are going anywhere. They're in there. We are ready for some legs. Okay, doing the same process and just marking out where I want my legs to be. Using that Forstner bit so that they'll be recessed once I actually put the T-nuts in, drilling the large hole that goes for where the screw is going to go. And I'm back to trim because I was just filling it in or trying it on before, and now I actually have to place it on there. And so I like to glue everything and nail everything. This trim isn't going anywhere. Same thing on the sides. This is where you really see, did your miter joints actually work out really well and you have a gap? But I did pretty good. I don't think I'm ready for crown molding in my house, but I definitely can rock the miter joint on a dresser. Okay, this is wood pate, which is a really good wood filler. It's from Farmhouse. You could use regular wood filler for this, but I'm just filling in my little nail holes that I put lots of everywhere, and the screws from putting it into the corner supports. And here it is. I mean, sometimes it's not really glamorous underneath, but wow, that structurally is good. We're all sound there. That center leg's not attached yet, as you can see. I was just trying it on for size. Get this back up on the dollies and moving on to the next step. Stripper. Now, I have used lots of strippers, and there's lots of eco-friendly kind. There's the orange stuff, there's the green stuff. This one is the stuff. This is the one. I have used a lot, and I just have stopped wanting to just mess with them because they take a long time. They're super messy, and I was getting to where I didn't like stripping furniture. It was just so annoying to have this goopy mess. This stuff, however, it works. It works and works. It's the best. And you have to keep it a little bit moist. So when I see areas that are totally drying out, I just add a little bit more. But you can see how quickly that worked. That was not more than 10 minutes. And just taking a metal putty knife and scraping it down, it goes right into a box. It will kind of harden up again, so it's not really terribly like gelatinous. And you can just toss that in the trash. But this really saves a lot of time. Now, I have stripped plenty of pieces using a carbide scraper, or essentially just grabbing my sander and going in with the sander and doing the whole thing that way. But in just a few minutes, I can use the stripper and get there faster. I used to feel like the carbide scraper was the fastest way, but now that I have gotten more comfortable with stripping and using this, I'm actually more comfortable with this now too. Same process on the drawers. I decided to strip the 3 center drawers rather than paint them. And now I have a little lacquer thinner in my little cup there. And that is just to remove residue and to remove parts on the corners and edges because I don't scrape those really hard. I don't want to damage the veneer. And so if there's anything that's not completely loosened up on the edges, I just leave it. And then I come back with lacquer thinner or acetone and just clean all that up. If you get the right products, it just melts a finish away. Now, I could probably strip that entire thing with it. I don't like to, but I could, but wow, that didn't take long. So now I'm going to sanding, and this process is much faster. This is just 120 grit, making good progress of this. A detail scraper is fantastic for getting into these areas that I call crumb catchers. It is a little routered area that is very rough because, of course, there's a substrate, and that substrate on this dresser is particle board. So that veneer, that oak veneer on there is sitting on top of particle board. And when they routed that edge and put that veneer in there, that is really rough inside there. So I scraped some of the old stain and all the top coat and everything that they had in there, and then sand it so that it's actually going to smooth out so much better. I'm using a sanding net, but you could certainly do this with regular sandpaper. The sanding net to me just gets through that a little bit faster. The detail scraper works great for all these little nooks and crannies. Super useful tool. And I like that it has, different heads that go on it. So there's all different shapes. So you scrape everything, it makes it rough. Then you got to go back with the sandpaper and smooth it all out. Getting that crumb catcher one more time. And then I like to actually pull the dust back out of that with my little vacuum cleaner. All right, we're going to go through sandpaper progression. So I started with 120 and I'm going to go through the 150, 180 to get to 220, which is my favorite place to stop when I'm getting ready to stain something. But you got to go through them all. So you can't go from 120 to 220. Just too big of a jump, and the wood just won't react the way you want it to. So I finished the top, and now I'm going to start scuff sanding, and that is done with 120 grit. Just scuff sanding the body of the dresser. Of course, getting that little foot sanded as well. And I have a little area on the top that is missing a piece of veneer. Now, you could totally just fill this in with wood filler, but when you stain it, it will really show. So I decided to take a little piece of veneer that I have and just cut it in there. I'm going to splice it in. This is a piece of veneer that I have. I've got a bunch of little pieces of veneer because sometimes they come off of old pieces and I hang on to them just for things like this. So I get it in there and get it pretty close. Put some tape on it. Let that dry, and I come back a few hours later, take the tape off, and now I'm going to sand it. And that is really what's going to make that fit. Because it had a different stain on it, and the edges weren't completely lined up. Once we get it completely sanded, it's going to look so much better. And when it's stained, you'll never even know that that is there. Okay, moving on to the nightstands, going through the same process, just sanding everything, scuff sanding the body, detail scraper on the edges, lots of sanding. This was a day that my fingers were killing me when I was done. It's just not a step you can skip. So important. Okay, moving on to the hardware holes. So all of these, of course, they're two separate brands and everything, and none of them are in the right places. And now that I know what hardware I'm using, these holes are not going to work. So I have to fill them all in. I prefer to do this with Bondo. There's a lot of different methods to it. You can use wood dowels, you can use regular wood filler, quick wood, there's a bunch of things. I have just decided and found for me, Bondo works the best. I get the smoothest finish. And just getting Bondo everywhere, that's now got to set up. So I'm finishing now with some rounded areas, doing sanding on everything that was round. I did a lot of scuff sanding with everything that was flat, and now I got to go back. Same thing with the drawers. So I'm going to do all the rounded areas. I've got a pad on my detail sander. Now, if you don't have a sander like this, totally fine. But because these areas are small and rounded, a lot of this would need to be done by hand and probably using some type of a sanding sponge. I happen to just be able to have a sponge on my sander, but if you don't, doing this by hand. And again, you're not sanding down a ton, you're just scuff sanding. Now the centers of the drawers, of course, with that repair, that needs to be sanded down flat. I'm not using a sponge there. I've got a flat sandpaper on there. And then using the sponge just on the areas that were rounded. Okay, back to traditional sandpaper, doing the fronts of those flat drawers. Everything that I can that's flat. I switch the pad, do everything that's molded. And the sides of the drawers still had remnants of the old stain and the old top coat, and I wanted to just clean all of that up. So we're starting fresh. There was just a couple holes on the doors that weren't in the right position, so I had to fill those in also. And these doors, and the whole dresser really was meant to look kind of weathered, and so this door is covered in all kinds of intentional dents and dings and things. So I'm going to have to do a lot more wood filler on these doors, which you'll see later, but it just required a little bit more work here. So again, using flat sandpaper wherever I can, and then switching to the pad for everything else. Time to get these hinges off. Now, vintage hinges want to be back in their spot. If I reverse these and then go put them on, that door will not function the same. So I make sure that when I'm taking these off, now the screws, the screws can go in different places, but pay attention to vintage screws also. There's some that are shorter than others, but I write where these go. This one goes on the top. And I only have two, so I don't have to keep track of bottom. I know that by process of elimination, if it doesn't say top, then it goes on the bottom. Okay, just finishing up with any hand sanding that I need to do. And flip this over and get ready to make that adjustment. Now remember, this door would barely open. Getting it open and closed was an issue, but because it's just solid as a rock and it didn't have any weird trim, anything on the front, I was like, I think I can just trim off a little 1/8 of an inch on the bottom, and sure enough, that worked just fine. So I just taped it off so I had something to follow, sanded everything, and then I realized that there's like 1,000 little pin nail holes. You don't see these so much when things are stained, but if I paint that with all of those, it's just gonna look horrible. So I'm like, oh great. I'm gonna spend the next half an hour doing nothing but tons of wood filler for all. There it is. Pox happened. My door has chicken pox, but that was necessary. Now, if you let wood filler dry, depending on your wood filler, you can go in with a barely damp rag and just wipe it off and not have to sand it all. So just a little shortcut there. Okay, I think I have sanded everything. I think we're sanded. So now it's time to dust and clean. We're going to move on to the next step. It's amazing that, like, wow, where have we come from already? New base, all kinds of things. And now we need new hardware holes. So I feel pretty proficient with a hardware jig. Now, this trim is so bulky that my hardware jig kind of falls down into that area, the recessed area in the middle. So I was kind of struggling with it. So I was like, I'll just put it in the inside, the part that normally hooks on the top of the drawer. I'll just set it on the inside of the trim. And I drill my hole and I'm like, what was I just thinking? I just drilled a hole in the absolutely wrong place. Hey, it happens to all of us. So reset my jig, put it in the right spot, drill a new hole. I made a little extra work for myself. I know the jig is supposed to make things easier, which it does, but oops, I messed that one up. I haven't drilled the hole in the wrong spot in quite some time, so I was kind of laughing at myself. Nothing that a little wood filler won't help. All right. So again, measured, get center. I'm only putting in one knob. So once you get to center and you set up your jig, nice and easy, they're all the same. Now I did have some drawers that the tracks were either completely missing or very loose. And so I had to get those repaired because we want them to function properly. I glued them down and then the back screws were completely missing. So I get those all in place. Now this drawer is going to function as it should. We are all good to go. We are moving on to stain. Final finishes are starting to happen now. Okay, this is wood conditioner or pre-stain conditioner. And I'm going to be using oil-based stains, so it's important to have the right pre-stain conditioner. You put it on there, you let it sit for a few minutes and wipe off any excess. But just verify what kind of stain you're going to use and what kind of pre-stain conditioner. And why do you even use pre-stain conditioner? Because it helps your stain go on evenly. You've spent so much time stripping and all the sanding, and you don't want to then have blotchy stain. So I always use it as, I usually use it. If I'm just going to stain a base or something, I don't usually use it. But if I'm doing something like dresser tops, drawer faces, yes, I spend the few minutes to do it. It's an extra step, but I think it's really worth it. So here we are with stain. Now this may look like I'm going in with really thick gray paint, but that is a really cool color stain. This is called Briarsmoke. And it's a warm brown gray. So I think it's going to coordinate well with the color that I'm thinking of for this piece. So it's not a color I've used before. This is my first time and I was a little shocked when I started putting it on too, like, whoa, that's really gray. But we're rolling with it. This is a wipe-on stain. This is not a gel stain, so this is a penetrating stain. And it does sink down into the wood where gel stains sit up on top. But when I wipe it back, I'm like, okay, now I'm seeing the brown tones coming through. I like it. So it goes on really gray and opaque, and I was worried. But then once I started wiping it back, I was like, ooh, I'm loving it. Because oak, if I just left it like it was, you can see how yellow it is there. If I didn't do any stain, you're like, why don't you just leave it natural and put on top coat? It would have just been so pretty. It actually would have just been yellow. So we have to mitigate some of the yellows and oranges with stains or washes or something. And I decided I want this to be really warm and something kind of muted, but just different. So I chose this color. All right, and just getting everything on evenly. Now, oak is a hard wood, so it can sit for a few minutes, but I only let it sit for just maybe 5 minutes before I start wiping it back. Now, don't use regular paper towels for this. You can use an old t-shirt or something like that, microfiber towels, but this is oil stained, so they'd be ruined. Or you can just use shop towels, which is what I'm using. They don't have lint, because if you're using regular paper towels, you'll have lint everywhere and you won't be very happy with your finished product. But super pretty color. Again, with the pre-stain conditioner, I let that sit for just a few minutes and then I go back and wipe off any excess. Go in with the stain. Only let it sit for a couple of minutes and then I'm going to wipe it back. Now this does need to sit and dry much longer than water-based stains, so while that's drying, I'm going to address the hardware. Now I like the hardware, but I'm just feeling something different. I kind of like, I like the brassy color, but I think black would actually be kind of cool. So I cleaned these really well. I soaked them and washed them, and they all got cleaned really well. And now I'm priming. So I follow a really similar process when painting hardware that I do with furniture. Primer, paint, top coat. I set up this little board. It has a bunch of screws from up underneath so I can attach hardware to these because when you're dealing with knobs and they're rolling all over the place, not fun. So I did primer, I did 2 coats of paint, and now I'm going in with a clear coat. And if you do spray painting, you need one of these little handles that goes on the top of your spray can. It's so amazing. And I will do multiple coats of top coat because I not only want these to be pretty, but they need to be durable. Okay, so that's going to sit and I'll come back and do more. Now, my stain is perfect. I let it dry for hours, and now I am going in with dewaxed shellac. So dewaxed shellac is going to seal my stain, and because it's dewaxed, it is not going to repel my next layer. My next layer is going to be a water-based top coat because I don't prefer to use oil-based top coat, and for many reasons, but I like the water-based top coat. But if I did it right over the top of my stain, it could potentially repel my top coat. So using the dewaxed shellac and letting that dry really well, you can then follow up with a water-based top coat. Again, one more step, but I think an important one. Okay, so just a good layer. And it doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to go in with top coat, but that was just to seal it all in. While that's drying, oil-based products take longer. So in between each thing, I have to go do other steps just to allow dry time. So while the shellac's drying, I decided to go ahead and line the drawers. Now, I usually do this the very last step, so this is unusual for me, but I'm going to go with it just so I keep working. And I measure everything. I like to measure my drawer liners to the exact size of my drawer. I'm using a big paintbrush as a little broom. I think it works better than anything else I have found to get all the dust out. And I just realized that we hadn't taken care of these labels yet. So I got some acetone out, and just like that, magic. It takes Sharpie off so well. It's like it was never there. Okay, I dry fit it. I want to make sure that fits and I got my measurements right. And then we're going to flop that right into the drawer. I get it seated into its spot, and then I use my hands first and just make sure everything's down in there nice and tight. And then a plastic putty knife just to make sure I get out all of the air bubbles. Such a pretty liner, and I think it's going to coordinate well with the final finishes. So pretty. And now that the shellac has dried, that has to sit for hours. Here goes the top coat. Now, I get a lot of questions. Why are you not using your sprayer for top coat? And I don't have a good answer. Sometimes I just go with a process. I'm not sitting thinking and contemplating it. I just grab top coat and go. Now, when I'm staining tops, a lot of times I do it this way. And I don't have a good answer. Sometimes I actually do get out the sprayer, but if I can because I'm going to do so many layers of this, that it's sometimes a little risky with the sprayer because you're leaving top coat in it. And I have had times where I've had chunks of top coat come out and it kind of ruins my top. And when I'm brushing it on, I feel a little more confident. So sanding in between coats, I'm going to do 5 layers of top coat. I want them, again, to be very durable. That's a wet microfiber towel. More top coat. My top coat's not tinted. I'm not changing anything. Just putting more and more layers on so this is durable. This is the 3rd coat. I'm not going to show any more. I think that was enough. You get the idea. All right, we are moving on. This is the next day. Time to set up my spray tent because big things are happening. And now I let that sit overnight. I don't want to put tape on a freshly top coated and stained top or any surface. So you got to let it sit and dry overnight. And I'm taping everything off. I use good old Kirkland Saran wrap. It's stretchy. I feel like I'm much more confident in this than those sheets, like the one I used in the center that has the tape on it. If you just touch that, I feel like it tears so easy. This stuff has got some stretch to it, and I love it. I have not had any issues with it, but I put a tape around there as kind of a little barrier, and then I put the saran wrap around, close it into the tape down the middle, get everything really secure. Into the tent we go. And I'm excited about this. This has been a long journey to get here. Really long journey. We haven't even addressed the legs, but there goes the legs for the nightstands, and there are the legs for the dresser. And see, I have little risers that those are sitting on so that I can spray them up on top of the dresser. And here goes my primer. Now, I use a tinted primer, and you could use white. There's no wrong or right to it. The only reason I use gray is because I happen to just like the coverage. And we're going from something super splotchy. And once you put gray primer on, that splotchy's all gone. You just don't see it anymore. Sometimes with white, I still can see through it. And I feel like with the gray, I don't get that. Okay, I have just purchased legs. These are just pre-made Amazon legs. They come unfinished. I buy them unfinished, so I don't have to sand off any other stains. And I've drilled holes in the top of a box so they can all go in standing up. It's so much easier to spray them this way, so you're not having to worry about them falling over or hitting the ground. So I highly recommend this process if you decide you're going to paint the legs. And they get primed, painted, and top coated just like everything else. We are moving on to paint. We are making good progress on this piece. Now I'm making a swatch for my client, and this is Farmhouse Weathered Stone. I have been wanting to use this color ever since I got it, and I was like, finally, I think I have a piece I can do it with. I made a little touch-up kit, and I'm adding some water to my paint so I can spray it. So that little touch-up kit and the swatch are going to go to the client. I forgot to film sanding the primer, but it was sanded and everything was wiped down. And here we go with color. Now this is, I would say this is biscuit or almond. Weathered stone, I felt like it was going to be really gray, but it's a really cool, just warm neutral. And I think trends are moving towards warmer things now. We're kind of moving away from everything being gray, and the warmer colors and the taupes are really coming back in. So I was super excited about this color and wanting to just use it. And I'm glad I have a project where I felt like it was going to be a good fit. So doing the same thing on the legs. Now they've dried for a couple of hours, and I am sanding now with sanding sponges. Just want to make sure everything is nice and smooth. And you can feel it with your hand. When you go over the areas, you can feel where the sprayer may have left a rough, like sandpaper finish. You can sand that right off. Now, once I got paint on the door, I just felt like all of those little intentional distressing and weathering bumps just looked awful. So I had to go back and fill in all the creases, all the dents, all the dings. And here we are again with the chickenpox door. But same technique. I let it dry for a while and then go back in with a kind of a barely damp towel to remove a lot of that. Just makes that process so much faster. Okay, and on the nightstands, the seams were doing the same thing for me. You never see those on a stained piece, but when you start getting ready to paint, and usually I can see them with the primer coat, but they didn't pop out so much. But as soon as I got to paint, I was like, oh, those seams look awful. So I went in with the same wood filler, and my finger worked great. Okay, in between coats, I also go in and touch up all the drawer edges. This is, the sprayer gets part of it, but just not the whole shebang. So I go in and touch this up, usually the tops and the sides of each drawer. I'll do 2 coats. Many times I also go back and do top coat. It just depends on the products that I'm using. A lot of times I'm using Evolution from Farmhouse, and that has a built-in top coat. So I feel like it's going to be super durable. I'm not worried about the top of the drawer. Not a really heavy, high use area. So I don't always top coat, but sometimes I go back and do it. I'm just using a little poly brush to do this. And second coat of paint. Now this paint has super good coverage. I mean, you hardly need the second coat, but I always do it. Like some really light colors, you almost need 3 coats, but I'm finding with Farmhouse Paints 2 is always good, but beautiful paint. 2 coats on the legs as well. I don't ever miss top coat. I get lots of questions sometimes about, do you always top coat? I always top coat. Even when I am using some amazing paints like Evolution, I will top coat every piece multiple times. So this is going to get multiple coats of top coat. Again, I want things pretty, but also durable. Even the legs are getting top coat. We are moving right along in this transformation. And after multiple layers of top coat, allowing everything to dry, now it's time to take these drawers back out, reveal some of the areas that I had taped off. You don't want that tape to sit on there for too long because it gets harder and harder to remove. You can see once paint gets on the tape and then it dries, it becomes really brittle. So try to take that off fairly soon. I waited a little too long here. You have to mess with it and then finally get it off and see how pretty everything is. I'm not going to reveal the top yet because I still need to flip this over and do some things to it. I don't want to risk getting it scratched. But it's time to put the feet on. So the little T-nuts are going on. And these typically come with your legs. So the legs that I purchased on Amazon came with the T-nuts. Everything's ready to go. The hanger bolts are already in these legs that I purchased. And hanger bolts is the screw portion that's usually sticking out of the end of the leg that will screw into those T-nuts. You can see my big beefy 4x4 leg supports. I think they're well supported. That's the idea. Okay, so I'm going to screw them in. Make sure they're nice and tight. And I always add either felt feet on the bottoms or the little nylon feet so they slide easier, especially when I now have legs on there. It's just so hard on the legs when they slide across floors without something to help them slide. Time to get this leg attached in the back. Because I pre-drilled the holes and I marked where that leg's supposed to stand, it made that process much easier. Okay, time to stand this beast up. It's so heavy. This is such a big dresser. And take the tape off. This is where you hold your breath. Please don't let there be any paint on my stain and no damage from the tape. And we are all good. Everything came out just fine. Okay, same process for the nightstands. Just getting those little T-nuts and hanger bolts in, screw in the legs, the little unveiling on the nightstand. Everything worked out just right. One of the final things that we need to do is reassemble the door. This is the catch for the door. And then the hinges need to go back on. Thankfully, we labeled them so we know where they go. Now, sometimes the screws that go straight down are a different length than the ones that go into the door. So you have to pay attention when you're taking them out that they might be different lengths. I'm putting a little microfiber towel down there because I don't want to scratch anything. This door is so heavy. And then I'm thinking, I can't hold this and try to hold the door and put screws in at the same time. So I'm going to grab a couple of little crates and things so that I can support it. Work smarter, not harder, right? So I had to build that up so it was the same height as what I was trying to, from where the door needed to be. So even a 2x4, making a stack so that that would go there. But I got it on there so I could get one screw in, just enough so that it would balance properly. And now I can get the rest of the screws in there. I'm getting those poles on the front. It's supposed to make it look like there's two. And the door closes just fine. Yay! Love it. All right, let's condition these super dry drawers. That wood is just screaming for some oil. I love this conditioner. This is Howard's wood conditioner, and it smells like oranges. It's lovely. But look what it does to that wood. Wow. Talk about dry. It makes the dovetails just pop out. Everything looks so pretty. I love conditioning the wood. Now I am going to do the insides as well. And if I were going to be lining the drawers, I would never do the conditioner first. You always do that after. If you get anything on the drawers of the oil and then go in with a liner, your liner won't stick. Those look so much better now. Can you feel the excitement? Getting so much closer to being done. Got to do the same process on the nightstands. Getting everything conditioned. I want everything to just shine and be beautiful. That hardware needs to go on, and I want to make sure that these have a pattern on them. So when I put them in here, I want to make sure they're all going in the right direction and all lined up. Okay, let's take a look back at this set. Now, again, remembering these were not a set and they were worn. They were in decent condition for their age, but we've changed them completely. And here they are now. I think this is such an improvement and just gives off such like modern country farmhouse feel. And I love the color of that stain. I'm sure I'll use that again. This weathered stone color in the paint is just, to me, so warm and inviting and neutral. You could pair that with so many different things. I'm loving the vibe of this. I think it was worth all of the work. Boy, this one really tested a lot of different things and new skills and, you know, all kinds of stuff with building, trying to figure out building the new trim on the front, all of that. So I hope this was super useful for you. All of the products and everything will be linked in the description. And if you love these kinds of transformations, I'd love it if you would subscribe to my channel and follow for more. Thank you so much for watching.